I'm Alex Monroe. I'm 32 years old. And on a sun-drenched Tuesday morning that was supposed to be about cake samples and wedding invitations, my own parents left a 5-word note on their kitchen counter that detonated my entire life. Before I tell you how that single piece of stationery led to a high-stakes corporate showdown that would change our family's destiny forever, do me a favor and drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. It began with an unnatural silence. That's the first thing that hit me. I used the side door to let myself into my parents' sprawling Charleston home, a route I'd taken 1,000 times since childhood. In my hands were 2 white boxes tied with string, holding the final cake samples, and a heavy stack of invitations, their ink still smelling fresh. My wedding, my life with David, a brilliant neurosurgeon and the only man I'd ever truly seen a future with. In 2 short weeks, we were supposed to be standing under the ancient oaks at Magnolia Estate, a venue so beautiful and exclusive it had taken me years of saving to secure. But the house was a tomb. My mother, Eleanor, was a creature of habit. By 9 a.m., the scent of her Earl Grey tea should have filled the air. My father, Richard, should have been in the den. The low murmur of the financial news a constant background hum to their morning routine. Today there was nothing, just a sterile quiet that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. My footsteps echoed on the terracotta tiles. Then I saw it, placed dead center on the vast marble island, like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, was a single sheet of my father's expensive, cream-colored letterhead, folded precisely in half. My name, Alex, was inscribed on the front in my mother's elegant, needle-sharp cursive. My heart gave a painful lurch. I set down the boxes and the invitations, my offerings now seeming pathetic and foolish. My fingers felt strangely clumsy, numb, as I reached for the note. I unfolded it. The message inside wasn't a letter. It was a verdict, a death sentence for the life I thought I had. 5 words. Wedding's off. Expect my lawyer. No salutation. No signature. No explanation. Just a corporate cold command followed by a threat. I stared at the words, my brain refusing to process them. I read them again, and a third time. It felt like the air was being vacuumed from my lungs, my vision tunneling until the only thing I could see was that cruel, elegant script. They hadn't even had the decency, the basic human courage, to sign their names. My first impulse was a tidal wave of panic. I needed to call David. I needed to hear his voice, to let my terror and confusion pour out. But as I reached for my phone, something else rose up to meet the panic. A feeling so cold and hard it felt like a shard of ice forming in my gut. It was a strange, unfamiliar clarity. I bypassed David's number. I didn't call my parents to scream or plead. I opened my text messages, found my mother's name, and with a thumb that was now perfectly steady, I typed a single powerful word. Understood. I pressed send. The message delivered instantly. Then, before the ice in my veins could melt, before the shock could give way to grief, I made a second call. Not to family, not to my fiancé. I called my bank. When the representative answered, my voice was unrecognizable to my own ears. It was level, professional, the voice I used with contractors and clients. I need to report a dispute and place an immediate freeze on an account, I said clearly. The account name is Monroe Family Wedding Account. Yes, that's the one. I am the primary contributor and I am contesting all further withdrawals. I hung up, got back in my car, and drove away, leaving the cake and invitations behind like artifacts from another life. The 48 hours that followed were a study in contrasts. A storm of silence from me, and a Category 5 hurricane of enraged calls and texts from them. By Thursday morning, my phone's log showed 67 missed calls from Eleanor, Richard, and my brother, Ryan. I didn't answer. I just sat in the deafening quiet of my apartment and let their fury burn itself out against the wall of my silence. I knew this was just the first tremor. The earthquake was still to come. For 2 days I was a ghost in my own life. I didn't go to work. I barely ate. I just sit on my charcoal gray sofa, the one David and I had picked out together, and stare at the blank TV screen. My mind was a frantic machine, replaying every interaction, Every conversation from the past 6 months. Searching for the cause. Did I offend my Aunt Carol when I said her son couldn't bring 3 of his frat brothers to the wedding? Was my mother still angry that I'd chosen a navy blue tuxedo instead of the traditional black she'd wanted? I was desperately searching for a rational explanation, a simple misunderstanding that could explain the sheer brutality of their actions. I was about to learn that there was nothing rational about it. It was a hostile takeover. The truth didn't come from them. It came, as it so often does, from a third party who had no idea they were a whistleblower. Late on Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin, Ethan. He was my father's sister's son, a good-hearted IT guy who lived in another state. We weren't close, but we were kindred spirits, both of us occupying the quiet outer orbits of the chaotic Monroe family solar system. His text was short and cautious. "Alex, you good? I got added to this group chat. I think it was a mistake. But man, this looks really messed up. Thought you should see it." Below the text was a screenshot, a long one, showing a stream of messages. My blood turned to ice water. The chat was titled, "Monroe Family Wedding Logistics." The participants listed at the top were a gallery of my accusers. My mother, Eleanor. My father, Richard. My younger brother, Ryan. And a handful of other relatives I'd mistakenly thought were on my side. I zoomed in, my hand shaking so hard the screen blurred. I had to set the phone down and take a deep breath before I could read the words. Eleanor. Update. Florist confirmed the new order. All bouquets and boutonnieres will be white roses, as Ryan wanted. Just a simple name swap on the invoice. Aunt Carol. Oh, that's so much more elegant. A wonderful choice, Ryan. Richard. Spoke with the events manager at Magnolia Estate. The contract transfer is complete. They don't care who the groom is, as long as the check clears. Ryan. LOL, told you it would be easy. Plus, the pictures will look 1,000 times better now. No offense to Alex, but... And then the message that stopped my heart. A reply to my brother's casual cruelty. From my mother. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't even silence. It was a single bright red heart emoji. An endorsement. A sound escaped my throat. A ragged, choking noise. I felt my lungs seize, unable to draw a full breath. They hadn't just canceled my wedding. They had stolen it. They had picked it up, lock, stock, and barrel, and handed it to my brother. Ryan and his boyfriend, Greg, were going to stand in my place, surrounded by my flowers, eating my cake, while my family celebrated. The sheer, calculated treachery of it sent a tremor of rage through me so powerful it made my teeth chatter. I let my head fall back against the sofa cushions, the ceiling spinning above me. Suddenly, a flood of memories, small, insignificant moments I had brushed aside, came rushing back, now imbued with a sinister new meaning. It started with the suit. I remembered the day about a month ago at the tailor's. It was a ridiculously exclusive place in the historic district, a place Eleanor had insisted upon. "A wedding suit is an heirloom, darling," she'd said. "It must be perfect." Eleanor was supposed to meet me there, but she'd canceled an hour before with a vague text. "So sorry. Something's come up." I went alone. As I was being fitted by the distinguished, silver-haired Mr. Salerni, the shop door chimed and in walked my brother, Ryan, holding a ridiculously large coffee. He feigned surprise, a wide, innocent smile spreading across his face. "Alex, hey, what are the odds?" he'd said, his eyes scanning my reflection in the three-way mirror. Mr. Salerni, ever the professional, had looked at Ryan over the top of his glasses. "You are not the groom," he'd stated, his tone flat. Ryan had laughed, a breezy, dismissive sound. "Not this time. Just in the area. Thought I'd say hi." He'd then settled into a plush armchair, scrolling on his phone while I stood there in my half-pinned suit. When I came out in the final ensemble, the charcoal gray tuxedo fitting like a second skin, Ryan's phone had been up, and he'd snapped a quick picture. "Just capturing the moment," he'd said with a wink. At the time, I'd been annoyed by the intrusion. Now I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a visit. It was a final fitting by proxy. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the cedar and old leather of the shop. On impulse, I grabbed my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I searched my email for Salerni. An order confirmation popped up. I clicked it open. My eyes scanned past the order number, past the description of the tuxedo, down to the line item for pickup. And there it was in crisp digital print. Order ready for collection. Client name, Ryan Monroe. I think I stopped breathing for a full minute. They had taken my suit. They had literally put my brother's name on my clothes. My first call was to the tailor shop. Mr. Salerni himself answered, and his voice was heavy with professional regret. "Ah, Mr. Monroe. Yes. I was expecting you might call," he said quietly. "I must be honest, it was a most unusual request. Your mother called the afternoon after your fitting. She provided a new set of measurements, just minor adjustments, and instructed my staff to change the name on the final order. She was most insistent. She said there had been a change of plans and that Ryan would be the one wearing the suit. She settled the final bill over the phone." He paused. "My apologies if there has been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Salerni," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You've been very clear. The final, public confirmation of my erasure came that weekend." I was numbly scrolling through Instagram, a form of self-torture I couldn't seem to stop, when I saw it. A new post from the official account of Magnolia Estate. It was a slick, professionally shot video. A montage of smiling faces under strings of fairy lights, of champagne flutes clinking, of a couple dancing under ancient, moss-draped oaks. The caption was a knife to the heart. A magical evening celebrating the union of two wonderful souls, Ryan and Greg. We were honored to host the beautiful Monroe wedding. Congratulations to the happy couple. I forced myself to watch. There was Ryan, my brother, beaming in my suit. There was Greg, his partner, looking happy but slightly overwhelmed. There was my mother, dabbing a single, perfectly timed tear from her eye as she watched them exchange vows. There was my father, his arm around my mother, radiating a paternal pride I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi's Spring, the exact piece I had chosen. The guests, my guests, were tossing white rose petals. I was not just absent. I had been photoshopped out of my own life. It was a complete and total replacement. The comments below the video were a cascade of congratulations. "Absolutely stunning. Eleanor and Richard, you must be so proud. Ryan, you look so handsome. What a gorgeous wedding. Now that's a Monroe family event. Pure class." I watched the video once, twice, 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. The shock had finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't just a family argument that had spiraled out of control. This was a premeditated act of war, a conspiracy to invalidate my entire existence. That night I called David. He was at a conference in Atlanta, blissfully unaware. I heard the concern in his voice instantly. "Alex, I've been trying you. Is everything okay?" "No," I said, the word feeling small and inadequate. "Nothing is okay." I told him everything. The note, the bank account, the group chat, the suit, the video. I laid it all out, my voice flat and emotionless, like a detective reading from a case file. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and vibrating with a rage that was all for me. They can't do this. Alex, this is theft. It's fraud." He paused. "I'm on the next flight home, and the first thing we're doing is hiring a lawyer." Hearing the fury in his voice was like a bomb on my raw soul. He was on my side. We were a team. I felt a sliver of warmth in the icy landscape of my heart. He was my rock. I didn't know then that my rock was about to crumble into dust. The foundations of my life weren't just cracked. They were about to be pulverized, and the deepest betrayal was yet to come. In the days following the revelation, David was my anchor. He flew back from Atlanta immediately, his face a thundercloud of righteous anger on my behalf. He held me when the delayed shock finally hit, when the rage gave way to waves of gut-wrenching grief. He was the one who said, "We'll burn them to the ground," while I was the one who just felt burned. But even with him by my side, a dark, nagging question kept echoing in the back of my mind. Why? Why this level of calculated cruelty? A simple cancellation would have been hurtful enough. This was something else entirely. This was a character assassination. The answer, or at least the beginning of it, came from a place I had long since buried. My own history. I was in my home office, trying to sort through old financial documents for our lawyer, when I came across a box labeled "College and Old Photos." I pried it open, a puff of dust making me sneeze. Inside, beneath old textbooks and yearbooks, was a smaller photo box. My fingers brushed across a picture, and I pulled it out. It was me and Colton. We were on a beach, squinting in the bright sun, his arms slung around my shoulder. We looked ridiculously young and impossibly happy. Colton, my first great love. The man I was with for 3 years before David. The man who had vanished from my life with all the suddenness of a magic trick. His breakup with me had been a wound that had taken years to scar over. We were planning a trip, a celebratory weekend getaway to Edisto Beach. We were in love. And then, the morning we were supposed to leave, I woke up to a text. A single, devastating text that had hollowed me out. "Alex, I'm so sorry. I can't do this. I think your family is right. I'm not good enough for you. Goodbye." Just like that. No call. No conversation. He was gone. For years, I had carried the shame of it, the quiet belief that I had been found wanting, that he had realized he could do better. But now, looking at the photo, 2 words from that text leaped out at me, practically screaming. "Your family." What did he mean? What did my family have to do with it? I had always assumed it was a throwaway line, an excuse. But now I wasn't so sure. The memory unsettled me so much I had to put the photo away. A few days later, the real ghost from the past decided to call. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some premonition, some gut feeling, made me answer. "Hello." A man's voice, hesitant and shaky, spoke my name. "Alex." I didn't recognize it at first. "Who is this?" It's Colton. Colton Hayes." I froze, the coffee mug halfway to my lips. It felt like a ghost had just whispered my name. We hadn't spoken a single word in 6 years. I saw a post from your cousin Ethan," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Something about your wedding. Alex, I am so sorry. And when I saw your mother's name mentioned, I realized I had to tell you. You deserve to know what really happened with us." I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly weak. "What are you talking about, Colton?" He took a deep breath, and the story he told me was so monstrous, so diabolical, that it made the stolen wedding seem like a petty squabble. "It was your mother," he said, his voice thick with a guilt that was 6 years old. "The day before we were supposed to leave for our trip, she called me. She asked me to meet her for coffee. She said she wanted to get to know me better. I was thrilled. I thought I was finally winning her over." He let out a bitter, choked laugh. "I was so naive. We sat in that little cafe, and she was charming at first. Asked about my job, my family. Then her tone changed. She started talking about you, about how sensitive you were, how you had a history of anxiety and emotional struggles. She told me about the panic attacks you had your freshman year of college. Details I didn't even know. She made you sound like you were made of glass." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. She had used my vulnerability, the things I had trusted her with, as a weapon against me. "Then she lowered the boom," Colton continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She looked me right in the eye, with this look of sincere, motherly concern, and she said, 'Colton, if you truly love my son, you will let him go. He's not strong enough for a serious relationship right now. The pressure is causing him to spiral. You're a good man, but you're not what he needs. He needs to focus on himself, on getting well.' She made it sound like I was poison to you, that loving you was hurting you. And you believed her? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I did, he said, his own voice breaking. I was 24, Alex. I was intimidated. She was so convincing. I went home that night and I felt like a monster. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was saving you by leaving you. It has haunted me every single day for 6 years. He was openly sobbing now. I'm so sorry. I was a coward. After I hung up the phone, I didn't move for a very long time. The coffee sat untouched, growing cold. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about a pattern. A long, horrifying pattern of manipulation and control. My mother hadn't just decided I wasn't worthy of a wedding. She had decided years ago that I wasn't worthy of love itself, unless it was a love she could approve of and control. That was the moment the grief finally died. It was replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Resolve. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. There was one more tipping point, one final, outrageous insult that would turn my resolve into a weapon. The next day, I received a formal, registered letter. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. I ripped it open. It was from my parents' lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It was a cease and desist order, demanding I stop making slanderous and defamatory statements about the family. But that wasn't the worst part. The second paragraph stated that I was being held financially responsible for the cancellation of the wedding and demanded I immediately reimburse Richard and Eleanor Monroe for all non-refundable deposits they had made on my behalf. It included a neatly itemized invoice. They had stolen my wedding, sabotaged my past relationships, and systematically tried to erase my existence. And now they were sending me a bill for the privilege. I started to laugh. It was a wild, unhinged sound that echoed in my silent apartment. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The absolute, bottomless pit of their narcissism. That laugh was the sound of something snapping inside me. The last thread of hope that my family could be redeemed, that this was all a terrible mistake, was gone. I didn't rip up the letter. I smoothed it out on my desk, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. I placed it carefully on top of my growing pile of evidence. This letter wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It was the final piece of proof I needed that these people were not just misguided. They were my enemies. I turned to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I didn't open my email to fire off an angry response. I opened a new document, and I started to write. Not a letter, not a legal brief, a business plan. The title was simple: Phoenix Architectural. ST 2023. Phoenix, a mythical bird that rises from the ashes of its own destruction. Felt right. They had burned my life to the ground. They had no idea what I was about to build in its place. The game was no longer about getting my old life back. It was about building a new one so powerful, so successful, that theirs would look like a pile of dust in comparison. The 6 months that followed were a blur of 18-hour days, cheap coffee, and a relentless, gnawing hunger to succeed. The grief was still there, a ghost limb that ached in quiet moments, but I didn't have time to indulge it. I poured every ounce of my anger, my pain, my humiliation, into building Phoenix Architectural from the ground up. It was the best therapy I could have asked for. I officially resigned from my cushy job at Charleston's most prestigious architectural firm. My boss, a man who had been my mentor, was stunned. "Alex, you're 2 years from a partnership. What are you doing?" "I'm building something of my own," I'd said, the words feeling more true than anything I'd said in years. My first move was to call Sarah, a whip-smart junior architect from my old firm. She was fiercely talented and chronically underestimated, something I understood all too well. I met her for coffee and laid it all out. "I'm starting my own firm, Sarah. The office is currently my spare bedroom. The starting capital is what's left of my savings, and our first client doesn't exist yet. But I have a vision, and I need a partner I can trust. I can't match your salary, not yet, but I can offer you equity, a real stake in what we build." She looked at me across the table, her eyes searching mine. She'd heard the rumors, of course. The whole Charleston design community had. But she didn't ask about the drama. She just asked, "What's the name of the firm?" "Phoenix," I said. A slow smile spread across her face. "I'm in," she said without hesitation. Our first office was a cramped, depressing space we sublet above a pizza place. The rent was cheap, and the constant smell of garlic was a small price to pay for a real address. We bought 2 desks from a used office furniture store and celebrated our grand opening with a couple of beers and a shared pizza from downstairs. It was humble, but it was ours. The work was a grind. We took anything and everything. A bathroom remodel for a dentist in Mount Pleasant. A new deck for a family in West Ashley. A garage conversion that turned into a nightmare of zoning permits. We were nobodies, competing against established firms, including my father's. I'd walk into pitch meetings, and I could feel the skepticism in the room. I was the guy with the fancy education from the big firm who was now, for some reason, bidding on kitchen renovations. I remember one pitch in particular. It was for a small commercial build-out, a project that could have put us on the map. We worked for a week straight on the proposal. We walked into the meeting feeling confident. The client, a gruff, old-money developer, listened to our entire pitch with his arms crossed, his face a stony mask. When we finished, he just grunted. "You're Monroe's kid, aren't you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. He shook his head. "Heard there was some family trouble. Look, kid, your design is fine, but I'm not getting in the middle of a Monroe family pissing match. We're going with a safer bet." And just like that, we were dismissed. I was silent the entire drive back to the office. The injustice of it was suffocating. My family had not only tried to destroy my personal life, but their toxicity was now poisoning my professional one. I walked into our tiny office and slammed my fist on my desk so hard the coffee cups jumped. "It's not fair," I yelled, the frustration finally boiling over. "I can't escape them." Sarah didn't say anything. She just got up, went to the small fridge and pulled out 2 beers. She handed one to me. "No, it's not fair," she said quietly. "So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to let them win? Or are we going to work so hard and become so successful that their opinion doesn't matter anymore?" Her simple, powerful words cut through my anger. She was right. Wallowing in self-pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. We drank our beers, and then we got back to work. A week later, we landed the dentist's bathroom remodel. It was a small, unglamorous job, but to us, it felt like winning the lottery. We celebrated that night by getting the expensive pizza with extra toppings. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Amidst this struggle, David resurfaced. He had been texting, calling, leaving voicemails I'd ignored. Finally, he just showed up at the office one evening as I was locking up. He looked haggard, like he hadn't been sleeping. "Alex, please. 5 minutes," he begged. I was tired. I was emotionally raw. But I also knew I needed to have this conversation to achieve a final closure. I let him in. The smell of garlic from the pizza place below seemed to amplify the awkwardness. This time, his confession went deeper. He talked about the immense pressure he'd been under his whole life to be perfect. The perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect surgeon. He admitted that Eleanor had expertly played on his deepest fears. The fear of failure, the fear of his career being derailed. She knew exactly which buttons to push. "Alex," he said, his voice laced with self-loathing. "She painted this picture of you as this fragile, beautiful thing that I could break. And she painted a picture of herself as the protective matriarch who knew what was best. She made me feel like I was being brought into this powerful, important family, and the price of admission was loyalty to her, even over you. It was a test, and I failed it. Miserably." He told me he'd been seeing a therapist, trying to untangle the ambition from the cowardice. He admitted he should have told me about the prenup and the dossier the moment it happened. "Why didn't you, David?" I asked, my voice flat. "That's the only question that matters." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible honesty. "Because I was afraid," he whispered. "I was afraid you would leave me, and I was afraid of what your mother could do to my career if I crossed her. So I chose the path of least resistance. I chose silence. I chose myself. And in doing so, I lost the only thing that truly mattered. Hearing the raw, unvarnished truth was both painful and strangely liberating. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had made a catastrophic, selfish choice when faced with a difficult situation. Pitted him more than I hated him. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said, and I meant it. "But I can't be a part of your recovery. I'm too busy with my own." I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open. "I need you to go now, David. And I need you to not come back." He looked at me for a long moment, then just nodded, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping his lips. He walked out, and this time I knew it was for good. I locked the door behind him, and I didn't feel sadness. I felt lighter. I was cutting the last anchor to my old life. From now on, Phoenix Architectural was my only partner. Our big break came from an unexpected place. A design competition for a public park pavilion. The prize money was small, but it was sponsored by a subsidiary of Harrison Holdings, the biggest real estate conglomerate on the East Coast. We poured our souls into that design. We worked around the clock for 2 weeks and submitted a proposal that was bold and innovative. We came in second. I was crushed. But a week later, I got an email that changed our lives. It was from a senior VP at Harrison Holdings. She said that while our design wasn't chosen, the review board, including the elusive CEO, Mr. Harrison, had been exceptionally impressed with our vision. They were inviting our unknown, 2-person firm to bid on the preliminary design phase for their new flagship project, the Magnolia Point Complex. A multi-billion-dollar development. Felt like a dream. We were guppies being invited to swim with sharks. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to just swim. I was going to bite. The year that followed was a blur of controlled chaos. We were in the major leagues. Being invited to bid on the Magnolia Point project was one thing. Staying in the running was another. We were competing against huge, established firms, including, as I'd suspected, Monroe Construction. My father's company. Every day was a battle. We were the underdogs, and we had to be smarter, faster, and more creative than everyone else. Sarah was a rock, a brilliant strategist who could see angles I missed. We hired 2 more young, hungry designers who practically lived at the office with us. We were fueled by a potent cocktail of ambition, terror, and a shared desire to prove every doubter wrong. Our contact at Harrison Holdings was the senior VP, Ms. Albright. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, sharp as a tack and allergic to bullshit. She saw something in us, our hunger, our attention to detail, and she became a quiet champion for our firm. To her, my last name was irrelevant. I was Alex, the founder of Phoenix, the guy who delivered brilliant work on time and under budget. It was exhilarating to be judged solely on my own merit. Through the grapevine of the Charleston business community, I heard whispers. Monroe Construction was in trouble. They had lost 2 major bids in the last year, and their reputation for being reliable was slipping. They were seen as old-fashioned, unable to keep up with modern design and sustainability trends. The Magnolia Point project was their lifeline, their one last chance to reclaim their former glory. My father was betting the entire company on it. The final selection process was grueling. It was narrowed down from 10 firms to 5, then to 3, and then finally to 2. Phoenix Architectural and Monroe Construction. The final presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Harrison Holdings Tower. The final decision, Ms. Albright informed me, would be made by the CEO himself, the almost mythical Mr. Harrison. The night before, Sarah and I were the last ones in the office. We rehearsed our presentation until we could do it in our sleep. The models were perfect, the renderings were stunning, the financial projections were airtight. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, packing up her briefcase. "Terrified," I admitted with a grin. "But I've also never felt more ready for anything in my entire life. This wasn't just a business pitch. It was the culmination of everything. It was the final chapter of the story." The next morning, I chose my suit with military precision. It was a deep navy blue, modern and sharp. It was the anti-suit, the opposite of the traditional, stuffy uniform my father always wore. It was the suit of a man who was building the future, not resting on the laurels of the past. Sarah and I were escorted to the 40th floor. The boardroom was awe-inspiring. A vast, gleaming mahogany table that could seat 30, surrounded by a wall of glass that offered a panoramic view of the city I was about to help reshape. The air itself felt expensive. Several board members were already there, powerful-looking men and women who exchanged quiet pleasantries. Ms. Albright greeted us with a warm, professional smile. "Alex, Sarah, good morning. Mr. Harrison has been slightly delayed in another meeting. He asks that you go ahead and set up your presentation materials. He also requested a small, last-minute change to the proceedings." "Of course," I said, my heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat. "He would like you to remain in the room for Monroe Construction's presentation after you're finished," she said, her expression unreadable. "He says he values your technical perspective and may want your feedback on their structural plans." I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline so intense it almost made me dizzy. The universe wasn't just giving me a front-row seat. It was asking me to be a judge. I managed a calm, even nod. "Understood. We'd be happy to." We set up our presentation at the head of the table. We were calm. We were ready. At 10:15, the heavy oak doors to the boardroom swung open, and my past walked in. My father, Richard, entered first. He looked smaller than I remembered, his expensive suit hanging on him as if he'd lost weight. His face was etched with anxiety. He was followed by my mother, Eleanor, a brittle, society smile plastered on her face, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the power dynamics. And trailing behind them, looking like a lamb being led to slaughter, was my brother, Ryan. They walked towards the table, and then they saw me. The reaction was cinematic. It was a symphony of shock in 3 distinct movements. My father's face went slack, the blood draining from it, leaving a pasty gray pallor. My mother's smile froze, then cracked, her eyes widening in a mask of pure horror. Ryan just stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth literally falling open. He looked from me to them and back again, his expression a comical mixture of confusion and terror. I didn't react. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood my ground, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair, and gave them a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. I was no longer their son, their brother, their victim. I was their competition. At that exact moment, the main door opened again and Mr. Harrison strode in. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes so blue they seemed to see right through you. He exuded an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. "My apologies for the delay, everyone," he said, his voice filling the room. His sharp gaze took in the scene in an instant. My family, frozen like statues of failure, and me, standing calm and ready. A flicker of something, amusement, understanding, crossed his features before he turned his attention to me. "Mr. Monroe, Phoenix Architectural. I trust you're ready to begin." "Yes, sir," I said, my voice clear and strong. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah and I were flawless. We didn't just give a presentation, we told a story of a new Charleston, of innovative design, of sustainable communities, of a project that would be both a landmark and a legacy. I was passionate, articulate, and completely in command of my material. When we concluded, a palpable silence hung in the room. The board members looked impressed. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Exceptional work, Mr. Monroe. Truly." He then turned his cool, blue-eyed gaze upon my family. "Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, the floor is yours." The train wreck that followed was almost painful to watch. My father, completely unnerved by my presence, fumbled his opening, dropping his note cards. My mother tried to step in, her voice unnaturally high-pitched as she prattled on about their company's long history and their deep roots in the community. She kept talking about family values and legacy and integrity, the words sounding hollow and obscene in that room. Ryan was supposed to handle the technical slides, but he was so flustered he kept clicking past the right ones. I just sat there, my face impassive, my hands steepled in front of me. I listened. I watched them implode. When their fumbling, desperate presentation finally ground to a halt, Mr. Harrison leaned forward. "Thank you. An interesting perspective." He let the silence stretch out, thick with their failure. He looked directly at my father. "You speak at length about your company's integrity." He turned his head slightly, his gaze flicking to me, then back to my father. "Before we conclude, I'd like to offer Mr. Monroe of Phoenix Architectural a chance to ask a question, purely on a technical or philosophical level, given his deep familiarity with the Charleston landscape." This was it, the checkmate. I stood up slowly. I didn't look at Mr. Harrison. I looked directly at my father, then my mother. "I only have one question," I said, my voice quiet, yet it sliced through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "Your entire brand is built on a foundation of family, trust, and tradition. My question is this. Is it a part of your corporate philosophy to build on foundations that are stolen?" Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. Richard looked like he was having a heart attack. I clicked the remote in my hand. The presentation screen behind me came to life. On the left, a high-resolution scan of my original, meticulously detailed wedding plan, complete with contracts and payment confirmations in my name. On the right, a series of crystal-clear screenshots from the Magnolia Estate Instagram video of Ryan's wedding. The stolen wedding. Because, I continued, my voice level and cold, this evidence suggests a certain flexibility in your definition of ownership. A demonstrated history of taking a plan, a venue, and a budget meticulously crafted by someone else, and passing it off as your own. I let my eyes drift to Ryan. It seems to be a family tradition. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the sound of a dynasty crumbling to dust. Mr. Harrison stood up, his face impassive. "Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned." He looked at my family, his voice devoid of all warmth. "Monroe Construction, we appreciate your time. Ms. Albright will validate your parking." It was the most brutal, elegant, and final dismissal I had ever witnessed. As my parents, utterly broken, stumbled out of the room like sleepwalkers, Ryan lingered for a second at the door. He still couldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at the plush carpet. "I knew it was wrong," he whispered, the words barely audible. "From the beginning. I'm sorry, Alex." Then he turned and fled, following the architects of his and my own destruction, leaving me alone in the silent, sunlit boardroom, the master of my own universe. The profound silence that descended upon the boardroom after my family's departure was not empty. It was filled with the weight of what had just happened. A quiet corporate execution. Sarah came to my side and gave my arm a squeeze, her eyes bright with unshed tears of pride. The board members began to murmur amongst themselves, casting looks at me that were a mixture of awe and respect. Ms. Albright offered me a crisp, contained smile that spoke volumes. Then, Mr. Harrison approached, his hand extended. "Alex," he said, his voice back to its normal, commanding tone. "Congratulations. The Magnolia Point project is yours." He gave my hand a firm, decisive shake. "I want to be clear. This decision isn't based on the family drama we just witnessed. That was merely a confirmation of a character flaw I already suspected. The decision was made the moment you finished your presentation. Your work is outstanding. You earned this fair and square. Welcome aboard." The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze. There were meetings, handshakes, and preliminary contracts to sign. I felt a deep, bone-deep satisfaction, but it was quieter, more profound than the triumphant glee I had expected. It was the feeling of a marathon runner crossing the finish line, too exhausted for a victory lap, but filled with the serene knowledge of having endured and prevailed. I knew one final conversation was inevitable. Came that evening. I was the last one in our new, beautiful office, staring out at the city lights, when my phone screen lit up with my father's name. A year ago, the sight of his name would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Now I felt nothing but a calm finality. I knew what I had to do, I answered the call. Alex. His voice was a ghost of its former self. It was thin, reedy, and cracked with a desperation I had never heard before. Son. Thank God you answered. Listen, son, we can fix this. It was all your mother's idea. You know how she gets these notions in her head. I didn't know how to stop her. It went too far. We can apologize. We can make it right. The same old excuses. The tired, pathetic abdication of a weak man who had spent a lifetime enabling a tyrant because it was easier than standing up to her. No, you can't, I said, and my voice was gentle, almost pitying. There was no anger left, only a vast, empty space where my love for them used to be. Some things are broken beyond repair. You both need to understand this. You don't get to burn my house down and then offer to help me sweep up the ashes to make yourselves feel better. But we're your family, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I could hear Eleanor's hysterical sobbing in the background, a soundtrack to their downfall. No, I said, the word soft but absolute. You're not. Not anymore. Family is a structure built on trust, respect, and love. My family is Sarah, who believed in me when I had nothing. My family might one day be David again because he is actively trying to rebuild the trust he broke. My family is the team I have built here. I took a breath, looking out at the glittering city I was now helping to shape. You two are just the people whose last name I happen to share. I let the words hang in the air between us. The opportunity to be my family ended the day I found that note on your counter. What happened in that boardroom today wasn't revenge. It was a business decision. And this, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, is a personal one. Goodbye, Richard. I ended the call before he could respond. Then, methodically, I opened my contacts. I found his name. I found my mother's name. I found my brother's name. And with 3 decisive taps, I blocked them all. It wasn't an act of rage. It was an act of architectural preservation. I was protecting the new structure. The 6 months that followed were less a new dawn and more a new world. Free from the gravitational pull of my family's dysfunction, I felt lighter, more focused, more myself than I had in 32 years. Winning the Magnolia Point contract wasn't just a career victory. It was an emancipation. Phoenix Architectural flourished. We were no longer the plucky underdogs. We were a force to be reckoned with. We moved into a stunning office space on the 38th floor of the Harrison Tower, just 2 floors below the boardroom where my life had pivoted. I hired 5 more people, the best and brightest young designers I could find. My days were a whirlwind of site visits, client meetings, and creative sessions. I'd walk onto the bustling Magnolia Point construction site, see the steel skeleton of my designs climbing into the sky, and feel a sense of profound, quiet fulfillment that no amount of money or revenge could ever buy. I occasionally saw news about my family's company in the business journal. Monroe Construction was in a death spiral. They'd lost the confidence of the banks, and several of their key people had jumped ship. I read the articles with a detached, clinical interest, like reading about the collapse of a foreign government. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Their fate was their own creation. One afternoon, an official-looking manila envelope arrived at my office via courier. It bore the seal of the State Medical Board. My stomach clenched for a brief second, a phantom limb of old anxiety. I opened it. The letter was formal and dry. It was a notification stating that, following a thorough investigation prompted by an anonymous complaint, the board had found sufficient evidence of undue influence and ethical misconduct by Eleanor Monroe in her capacity on several hospital fundraising boards. She was being formally censured and permanently removed from all her positions. The investigation, the letter noted, had been triggered by a detailed, confidential report filed by a senior physician at Charleston General. David. He had actually done it. He had followed through. He had willingly put his own career in the crosshairs to do the right thing, to hold my mother accountable in a way no one else ever had. It was a quiet, courageous act of atonement. It didn't erase the past, but it honored it. It was proof that the man I had once loved was still in there, fighting his way out of the wreckage. A week later, I was sitting at an outdoor cafe, sketching idly in my notebook, when I saw him walking down the street. It was the first time I had seen him in person in almost a year. He saw me at the same time, and he stopped, hesitating on the sidewalk. For a moment, I thought he would turn and walk away. The old David would have, but he didn't. He took a breath and walked over to my table. He looked better. The constant tension around his eyes was gone. He seemed calmer, more settled in his own skin. He didn't launch into a grand apology or a desperate plea. He just stood there for a moment, a small, tentative smile on his face. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. It was such a simple, perfect question. A question for a new beginning. Not asking to reclaim his old seat in my life, but simply asking if there was a vacant one now. I looked at him, at the man who had hurt me but who had also, in the end, chosen honor over silence. I thought about the lonely nights, the hard work, the man I had become. I was no longer the fragile boy he had been convinced to leave. I was the architect of my own life, and an architect knows when a foundation is strong enough to build on. I closed my sketchbook and gestured to the empty chair. "It's all yours," I said. He sat down and we ordered coffee. We talked for hours. We didn't talk about my mother or the wedding or the pain. We talked about a difficult surgery he had performed. We talked about a challenging design problem I was solving. We talked about a book he'd read that he thought I would love. It was quiet and careful and real. When we left, he walked me back towards my office building. We stopped at the entrance, the bustling city life swirling around us. "Alex," he said, his voice serious, "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I hope this can be a start. A new one." "I hope so too, David," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. He didn't try to kiss me or even hug me. He just reached out and gently squeezed my arm. A brief, warm pressure that spoke more than 1,000 apologies. Then he smiled, turned, and walked away, leaving me with the scent of fresh coffee and the unexpected, tentative feeling of a new blueprint taking shape. Tonight, I am standing alone on the rooftop terrace of the Phoenix Tower, the first building in the Magnolia Point complex to be completed. The building isn't officially open to the public yet, but the perks of being the lead architect mean I have a key. A cool breeze drifts in from the harbor, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. Below me, the city of Charleston is a breathtaking tapestry of light, woven against the dark velvet of the low-country night. I can trace the familiar lines of the Ravenel Bridge, the historic spires of St. Michael's Church, the shimmering ribbon of the Ashley River. It's a city defined by its structures, by its history, by the stories held within its walls. And now, I've added my own story to its skyline, written not in ink, but in steel, glass, and stone. For so long, my life felt like a blueprint drafted by someone else. I was playing a role in the Monroe family narrative, a story in which I was cast as the less important son, the adequate but uninspired supporting character. I spent more than 3 decades trying to earn a bigger part, trying to prove I was worthy of a leading role in a story that was never mine to begin with. The note my parents left on that kitchen counter wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of their story for me. It was the moment the old blueprints were set on fire, and I was forced to draw my own from memory, from scratch, from a place of pure will. It was the moment I learned the most fundamental rule of architecture. You can never build something strong and lasting on a rotten, compromised foundation. Sometimes the bravest, most necessary act is the demolition. My true victory wasn't the moment of triumph in that boardroom. That was just the catharsis, the satisfying crash as the old, unstable structure came down. The real victory is this quiet moment, the solid, reassuring feel of the terrace floor beneath my feet, the hum of the building's lifeblood running through the walls around me, the profound peace that comes from looking at something beautiful and complex and knowing, in your very bones, that you built it. You envisioned it, you fought for it, and you brought it to life. They didn't succeed in erasing me. They only succeeded in giving me a blank slate. They forced me to become my own architect, my own builder, my own client. I learned that the only validation that ever truly matters is the kind that comes from the work itself, from the quiet pride of a job well done, from looking at the life you have meticulously, painstakingly built, and being able to say with absolute certainty, "This is mine. This is strong. This is good." Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to tear down a part of your life to build something better? Share your story in the comments below. I genuinely love to read them. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.